I'm Jess, and it's so great to be with you for a few moments today. Welcome to Kingston Standard Church, our online version. I'd love to invite you to connect with us online or in person. If you're in the Kingston area, come on out. We would love to see you. If you're limited to online connection though, not a problem. Just be sure to check out our website for at-home worship resources. But in the description box of this video, you're going to find the link to our website. As well, you can always follow us on YouTube and like us on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to both so that you'll stay up to date on all the new content when it's posted. We have a variety of resources available to families and kids on both Facebook and YouTube. So if this is your first time joining us, or if you've been here before, we want to encourage you to go ahead and check that out, because our mission is to equip families for the conversations that they have together to learn and grow and follow Jesus. And if you want to touch base personally, then feel free to reach out. You can send us a message on Facebook, or you can use the address below. So let's dive in and see what we're going to learn about today.
We all have stories of healthy and unhealthy influences in our lives. This young guy named Eddie that I knew in one of the places we ministered, and that's not his real name, he was a teen leader who was growing in healthy influence, and he was developing continually stronger and stronger character as a leader. And he was in a team of students that had weekly times of accountability and study. And then at one point, he let us know that he had started hanging around with this girl and had started dating her. And so the team just asked some innocent questions. How's this going? Who is she? All that kind of thing. Where do you see this going? And oh yeah, it's all going to be good. It's all going to be good. About 6 months later, he had dropped out of the ministry team and kind of stepped away from leadership in our teen ministry. Shortly after, he completely walked away from faith, and I'm not aware that he's ever returned. One author put all of that together in this way: friends will influence the quality and direction of your life. Eddie is a bit of a cautionary tale that people close to us, they will lead us somewhere. And so are the people close to us people that we'll listen to that can help keep us on track. Because we've all watched people as they justify their actions, and we can predict what will happen next. It may not be obvious to them, but we've got enough life experience to be able to follow the pattern. But you know, sometimes we can have the same problem in our own lives. As we look at the scripture today, there's that same level of maybe self-deception that happens here. In a bit of a contrast, we've got King Saul and David, and this character we always see around the edges, Jonathan. Now, Saul, he had started out really well. I mean, he didn't have a close confidant. He had advisors. He had an entourage. He listened to Samuel. But that person who was missing, that was really in close, that could help keep him accountable, because he was headstrong and he was prone to jealousy, but there was no human in close that he could trust to help him see this. And so as a result, the unfortunate summary of his life is that he was known as vengeful. And in his later years, his influence was oppressive, and it really didn't end well for Saul. Jonathan, who was the heir to the throne, and if you're familiar with this whole account in the Old Testament, we kind of know him as the best friend ever. He's the friend that we would all aspire to be like. And we meet up with him shortly after David kills Goliath. Jonathan and David, in the way that we would summarize it, they just clicked. The scripture helps us to see that they were immediately bonded after this moment. Best buds from that moment on. Now, sometimes we have those friendships that just kind of click, right? But even when it's a natural thing, like the way it was with David and Jonathan, and how it can be sometimes with us, we still have to work at staying connected. Jonathan and David had a lot of things that could have pulled them apart. Jonathan's a prince. David's a shepherd. Jonathan is very high on the social scale. Of course, David is not at all. But David is also a rising star in the kingdom of Israel, and he could become a threat to Jonathan and his actual job of becoming king. In our lives, there's a lot of things that pull us apart. Life stages change, people move. In our cases, in our culture, a lot of times we're not really oriented toward those deep connections that are important. And we can end up with just a lot of acquaintances, people that we know. They're friends or they're people that we follow on social media and we know them. But there are still some walls that kind of keep us from the place where very few people actually know us. And when you think about it, we've talked about how this is kind of a bit of an odd connection because David could be a rival for the throne that technically was going to belong to Jonathan. And even in spite of this potential competition, Jonathan again and again pursues the best for David, even when Jonathan was getting the short end of the stick. Now, let's have a look at one particular account in 1 Samuel chapter 19. This is one exchange of many where we see the character of Jonathan and the connection between he and David. Verses 1 through 10. Saul now urged his servants and his son Jonathan to assassinate David. But Jonathan, because of his strong affection for David, told him what his father was planning. Tomorrow morning, he warned him, you must find a place out in the fields. I'll ask my father to go out there with me, and I'll talk to him about you. Then I'll tell you everything I can find out. Well, the next morning, Jonathan spoke with his father about David, saying many good things about him. The king must not sin against his servant David, Jonathan said. He's never done anything to harm you. He's always helped you in any way he could. Have you forgotten about the time he risked his life to kill the Philistine giant and how the Lord brought a great victory to Israel as a result? You were certainly happy about it then. Why should you murder an innocent man like David? There's no reason for it at all. So Saul listened to Jonathan and vowed, as surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed. Afterward, Jonathan called David and told him what happened. Then he brought David to Saul, and David served in the court as before. War broke out again after that, and David led the troops against the Philistines. He attacked them with such fury that they all ran away. But one day David was sitting at home with a spear in his hand, and the tormenting spirit from the Lord suddenly came over him again. As David played his harp, Saul hurled his spear at David. But David dodged out of the way, and leaving the spear stuck in the wall, he fled and escaped into the night. Now, for those of you who are familiar with this whole account, you recognize the jealous game that Saul is playing here. And if we look back, we see that it all started with this victory parade following the defeat of the Philistines. The suggestion that David was better than Saul in the shouts of the crowd. They shouted out in hyperbole, Saul is an awesome warrior, but David is 10 times better. It was all around the defeat of Goliath, but as a result, Saul starts to behave like some of the kings of other nations, to circle the wagons, to protect the throne. David is a threat. And in the most common experience of the day, if there was a rival in the kingdom, the king would solidify his authority with a purge of anyone who could be seen as a threat to lay claim to the throne. You're protecting your own legacy when you do that. And Saul, because he equated David as a threat, he thought his family would be wiped out, and his fears were something that he acted on. In the meantime, Jonathan protected David, and sometimes it was at quite a greater risk. Even when it wasn't in his best interests. In our text, we even see his defense of David. He says to his father, take a look at David's heart here. Well, by this time, Saul was running off on his own. He was doing his life by himself, isolated living life alone with no close counsel, and even at this point, ignoring God's insight and direction in his life. Rather an amusing story that came to my hearing quite a number of years ago, perhaps you've heard it, is of a bricklayer responding about an insurance claim. The letter reads like this: "Dear Sir, I'm writing in response to your request for additional information on my insurance claim. In block number 3 of the accident claim form, I wrote, 'Trying to do the job alone' as the cause of my accident. You said in your letter that I should explain that statement more fully. I trust the following details will be sufficient. I'm a bricklayer by trade, and on the date of the accident, when I was working alone on the roof of a new 6-story building, I completed my work and I discovered I had about 500 pounds of brick left over. So rather than to carry the brick down by hand, I decided to lower them in a barrel using a pulley which was attached to the side of the building at the 6th floor level. Securing the rope at ground level, I went up to the roof and I swung the barrel out, loaded the bricks up, and I went back to the ground to untie the rope, holding it tightly to ensure a slow descent of the 500 pounds of bricks. You'll note in box 22 of the claim form that my weight is approximately 160 pounds. Due to my surprise at being jerked off the ground so suddenly, I lost my presence of mind and forgot to let go of the rope. Needless to say, I proceeded up the side of the building at a very fast rate of speed. In the vicinity of the 3rd floor, I met the barrel coming down. This explains my fractured collarbone. But slowed only slightly, I continued my rapid ascent, not stopping until the fingers of my right hand were 2 knuckles deep into the pulley. Well, by this time, I'd regained my presence of mind and sought to hold on to the rope tightly in spite of my pain at this high height. At approximately the same time, however, the barrel of bricks hit the ground and the bottom fell out of the barrel. Now, without the weight of the bricks, the barrel weighed approximately 50 pounds. Again, I refer you to the block referring to my weight. As you might imagine, I began a rapid descent down the side of the building, and in the vicinity of the 3rd floor, I met the barrel coming up, and this accounts for 2 fractured ankles and the lacerations on my leg and lower body. The second encounter with the barrel slowed me enough to lessen my injuries when I fell on the pile of bricks, and fortunately only 3 vertebrae were cracked. I'm sorry to report, however, that as I lay there on the bricks and in pain, unable to stand and watching the barrel 6 stories above me, I again lost my presence of mind and let go of the rope. This empty barrel weighed more than the rope, so it came down upon me and did break my ankle. I hope I've furnished enough information to sufficiently explain why trying to do the job alone, as stated before, was the cause of the accident. Sincerely, the author. Now, trying to do the job alone is a silly story, but oftentimes we don't even see how we're trying to do life alone, and when Saul is going it alone, he ends up making so many messes along the way. If you're familiar with how things roll here, Saul hunts for David for years, and Saul continues to hide from people, and David hides from Saul for years and years and years. All during this time, Jonathan is a stable friend to David. It's the kind of friend that we all need. It's the kind of friend we'd all like to be, dependable through all the difficult situations, even though sometimes some of those situations really could have been awkward. That whole taking my job, potentially wiping out my family, that could mess up trust quite a bit between David and Jonathan. But what we see during this season of friendship is how David's character grows and how his influence grows because of his solid influence in his life of Jonathan. Fast forward a number of years to a decisive battle in the kingdom of Israel, and it's when Jonathan and Saul both are tragically killed in battle. It takes a number of more years in the midst of some political jostling, but David does become king of Israel, and unlike all of the kings of his day who would potentially have wiped out any threats, David in turn searches for and welcomes Jonathan's family, seeking to show them kindness and generosity. All of Saul's fears really went unrealized, but that could be a whole other message. Now, David in the years that follow, after Jonathan, there's no other person that seems to come close to that influence, and we could make an argument that some of his veering off track later on might have been prevented if someone like Jonathan was still around. It started off innocently, as we know, not going to battle as he usually would, which seems like an okay decision, right? But it leads to an affair with a trusted friend's wife. It leads to murder. It leads to significant conflict within his own family. One author put it this way, that David's authority was never the same after the affair as it was before. No matter what the situation, how many times do we hear statements like were probably raging through David's mind? He may have even said it privately. I never meant for it to happen like this. It makes us wonder what kind of messes might have been avoided if Jonathan had still been around, or if a Jonathan-type person had been present in David's life. We'll never know. But these conversations are so critical for us to have because God helps us to see in this whole story the value of moving past just knowing some people at the casual surface level. Those NWS friends, right? The news, weather, sports conversations, and that's as deep as it goes. And too often we can have people around, but there's no one who's really in close who has permission to speak some of the hard statements to our lives. Sometimes that happens because we've been hurt and it causes us to push away from the people we need most because we see them as a threat, like we witnessed with Saul. So God is encouraging us to move past that casual connection, to be known, to be loyal, open, and in sync with a small group of people or an individual that will help us to stay on track in life. So God gives us this example of so many ways to help us see the redemptive value of people in our lives. He gives us this map of friendship where Jonathan stepped into the political mess to defend David at his own risk. It's an example of a selfless life that looks out for the other, the loyalty that's expressed, the honesty of understanding deeply who a person is and what they need, to be a mutual encouragement. And we've already alluded to how this had to be cultivated because there were so many threats to trust. This is part of the map of friendship that God is showing us here. He's also helping us to see the ministry of presence. When David's in need in our passage of Scripture, Jonathan doesn't wait to be asked. He says, I'll just let you know when I find out. This is what I'm going to do to help. Life together is so important in good times and in difficult times. And we know that it's not always what is said, but oftentimes being present, just being there, is so much more important. It becomes a reflection of the presence of God. We feel the difference because there are people with us. We know the difference because of experiencing the presence of God through people being with us. And it's quite a difference between being someone who says, let me know what you need, which is kind of a weak way to go about it, and someone who has the ministry of presence who says, I'm here and let's do what needs to be done. But he also shows us in this the model of influence. And we've mentioned David's continued rise several times as we see Jonathan continuing to help David stay on track. his healthy influence, how they built each other up, how they were a mutual encouragement. That's something that God is showing us that we all need to help us stay on track. People that point us in the direction of God's wisdom and instruction. Because lives and habits tend to rub off. We all need that other sane voice in the world that can have permission to say, you need to go for it, or man, you need to avoid that at all costs. It's that model of influence that God is giving us. We've mentioned before, friends will determine the quality and direction of our lives. And we all want to be a friend, and we'd all love to have a friend like Jonathan. And this whole account, this image of Jonathan helping us to see this map of friendship and ministry of presence and the model of influence, is kind of curious how it's a reflection of the way God longs to continue to interact back and forth with us too, in that closeness, in the map that includes the loyalty and the honesty and the openness with Him, and the ministry of His reassuring presence and modeling life for us that will help keep us on track. Here He gives us this vivid Old Testament image of the connection that God has in mind for us with Him and with each other. As we receive His sacrifice and engage with the reality of His resurrection, we can see how we need Him. Otherwise, we end up alone, potentially off track, and we may not even realize how far off into the weeds we've gone. We live by our own authority, and no one can tell us otherwise, and like Saul, it may not end up well. This whole thing is summarized in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 12, when it says, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. Well, we can clearly see what the problem is and how it comes for us. When we're trying to do life alone, we get isolated. We may think we're all set, kind of living like we're good, like Saul did, but we can see how that worked out. And we can see from the outside this cautionary tale of Saul working alone, the encouraging tale of David and Jonathan walking together in spite of all the very good reasons that they could have been enemies, and how that veered off track when Jonathan was gone. We know friends will influence the quality and direction of our lives. And the lack of people in close makes us vulnerable because we end up seeking to go it alone. So the question that I have for you today is, who has that up-close, deep role in your life? Is there someone for whom you can be that up-close, deep, connected role, helping guide the way in life? Because we know people will influence us, and we all long to be people of influence. We want to have a healthy influence, to be led or to lead in a growing direction, to lift people up instead of dragging down. You know, in that case, not all heroes wear capes. Some of the heroes might just look like friends, following this God-given example of people who are just like Jonathan.
Thanks again for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channels, or if you're watching this on Facebook, then you can like and follow us there. And it would mean so much to us if you took a moment to comment, like, and share this video so that others are able to enjoy it as well. And hey, if you're in the Kingston area, come on out. We would love to see you. Please know, though, that you are loved and that we're praying for you. And we certainly appreciate your prayers too. We'll see you soon.